The morning the world I had built began to come apart. The sea below Alderhythe was the flat gray of a pewter plate, and the great house smelled of beeswax and cut lilies forced early in the glass houses. I remember the lilies most of all. Their scent was too sweet for the hour, too sweet for the cold, and it followed me down the long gallery like something that knew what was coming. Everything at Alderhythe had been polished to a hard shine. The footman had been up since 4. The silver on the sideboards threw back the thin light from the windows, and the marble of the entrance hall had been scrubbed until it gleamed like wet bone. It was the day the Lord Lieutenant of the county was to arrive, Lord Merrick, a man whose good opinion my husband wanted more than he wanted air, and the whole of the household had bent itself toward that single hour of arrival the way a field of barley bends before the wind off the water. I had dressed with great care. I want that understood. I did not creep about my own house in rags. I wore gray silk the color of the sea that morning, and my mother's small pearls, and I had my hair done plainly, because plain suited me, and I had long since stopped trying to be anything. I was not. I was the Duchess of Renmore. Whatever else had gone wrong between the walls of that house, that much was still true, stitched into the parish register in ink 4 years old. I came down at the appointed time and took my place near the foot of the staircase where the mistress of a house stands to receive an honored guest at her husband's side. That is the whole of it. That is where I stood, because that was where I belonged, and I had learned to hold very still in the places where I belonged, so that no one could say I had put a foot wrong. The carriage came up the drive a little before 11. I heard the wheels on the gravel, the shout of the grooms, the ring of hooves. My husband descended the last 3 steps to be nearer the door. He was a handsome man, Alaric. I will not pretend otherwise. It would be a lie, and I am done with lies. Tall and dark and carrying his name the way other men carry a drawn sword. When he wished to, he could make a room feel smaller simply by entering it. And then she came down the stairs behind him. Vesper. I did not turn to look at her. I did not have to. I heard the particular whisper of her gown, a silk far finer than mine, paid for out of the Renmore accounts that were not the Renmore accounts at all, though no one in that hall knew it yet but me. I heard the small, satisfied hush of the servants, who had learned already which way the wind was set. She came down and she stood a little apart, and she waited, and the whole hall waited with her, and I understood that something had been arranged that morning to which I had not been a party. The doors opened. Lord Merrick came in out of the cold with his secretary and his steward behind him, stamping the chill from his boots, all bluff good humor. My husband went forward to greet him. There were the usual words, the bowing, the compliments to the house, and the drive, and the view of the sea. And then Lord Merrick, being a courteous old man of the old sort, looked past my husband's shoulder to where a duchess ought to be, and he said, "And her grace, I hope I have the pleasure." There was a silence then, only a heartbeat of one. But I have lived a long time inside single heartbeats, and I can tell you that a great deal fits inside them. My husband did not look at me. He put his hand out, palm up, toward Vesper, and he drew her forward into the light of the tall windows, and he said, in a voice pitched to carry the length of that marble hall, "She'll stand beside me today." He said it lightly. That was the cruelty of it, not the words, but the ease of them. As though he were remarking on the weather, as though I were a chair that had been moved to a more convenient wall. Lord Merrick's face did something complicated, and then settled into the smooth mask that gentlemen wear when they have decided not to have seen a thing. He bowed over Vesper's hand. The moment closed over itself like water over a stone, and I stood at the foot of the staircase in my sea-gray silk, and I felt every eye in that hall slide toward me and away again, quick as minnows, and I understood that I had just been erased in my own home, in front of the one man in the county, whose witness would carry the story to every drawing-room, from here to the cathedral city by nightfall. I did not weep. I want that understood too. I had wept in the early years, in rooms with the doors shut, and I had learned what my tears were worth to the people who caused them, which was nothing, or worse than nothing. So I did not weep. Instead, I looked down at my own left hand. The wedding ring my husband had put there 4 years before was a plain band of Cornish gold, and it had never fit me quite right, a little loose, so that in cold weather it would turn on my finger of its own accord. I looked at it in the gray light. I thought of the day it had been given, and of the girl I had been, who had believed a great many things that were not true. And then, slowly, without any haste at all, while the hall was busy admiring Vesper, and no one was troubling to watch the woman who no longer mattered, I drew the ring from my finger. It came away easily. I closed it inside my palm, where it was warm, and I held it there, and I felt something inside my chest go very quiet and very clear. Not broken, as they would all have liked to imagine, but clear, the way the air goes clear after a storm has finally passed over and left you still standing. They thought, all of them, that they had just watched a wife be cast down. They had no idea what they had actually set loose. To understand what happened after, you must first understand the horse. His name was Halcyon, which means a season of calm, and there had never been a creature at Alderhythe less deserving of the name. He was a great black stallion, 16 hands and more, with a coat like wet slate, and an eye that showed white at the edges when he was crossed, which was often. The old Duke, my husband's father, had bred him and broken him and loved him past all sense, and had ridden him along the cliff paths in every weather until the morning 3 years ago, when the old man's heart had simply stopped, and he had gone down in a stable yard with the reins still in his hand. The horse had not been right since. They had tried everything. The head groom, Trevorrow, a patient man who had gentled horses for 40 years, had been kicked hard enough to lose the use of 2 fingers. A stable boy had been bitten to the bone. Halcyon would let no man put a hand on him. He screamed in the night. He wore a path in the earth of his box, round and round, the way I have seen caged things do, and the whole of the yard had come to speak of him in low voices, as though he were less a horse than a haunting. The old Duke's grief, given 4 legs and a set of teeth. My husband would have had him shot. He said so at dinner once, carelessly, the way he said most cruel things. It was Lady Morwenna, his great-aunt, who forbade it, a small, straight-backed old woman, with a voice like a dropped coin, who had outlived 3 dukes and did not much fear the 4th. He was your father's, she said. You will let him grieve, and my husband, who feared very little, feared her, and so the horse lived. I found him by accident, or perhaps not by accident. I have never been sure. In those days I walked a great deal, because walking was the one thing at Alderhythe that no one could arrange for me or take away, and my walks took me often past the stable yard in the gray light before the house was properly awake. And one such morning I heard him, not the screaming, but a low, broken sound, deep in his chest, the sound of something that has forgotten how to be comforted. I stopped at the half-door of his box. I did not go in. I am not a fool, and I had seen Trevorrow's hand. I only stood there in the cold with my hands folded, and I said nothing at all, and I did not go away. He came at the door once, ears flat, teeth bared, all that black fury, and I did not move. I had grown very good, by then, at not moving in the presence of things that wished to frighten me. I simply waited, and let him find that I was not going to run, and was not going to reach for him, and wanted nothing from him at all. It took a long time. I will not pretend it was the work of a morning. It was the work of many. But there came a day when the great head lowered, and the white went out of his eye, and he took 1 step toward me across the straw, and then another, and he put his soft muzzle against my folded hands and breathed, and stood there, quiet, in the season of calm his name had promised and never once delivered to anyone else alive. After that he was mine, in the way that only frightened things can belong to you utterly and against all reason. When I passed the yard he would call to me, When I stood at his door, he would come. The grooms watched it with open mouths. Trevorrow, God bless him, wept the first time he saw it, the tears running frank down his weathered face, because he had loved the old Duke, and he had loved the horse, and he had thought both of them lost. And it was noticed, of course. Everything at Alderhithe was noticed. That the Duchess, no one troubled to look at, could walk unharmed into the box of the killing horse, that she could lay her cheek against the neck of the beast that had maimed a groom and terrified the yard, it did not make them love me. Fear seldom makes people generous. It made them wary of me, which is a different thing, and in the weeks that were coming, I would learn that being feared a little is worth a great deal more than being loved a little, when the fighting starts. But there was one who watched the horse gentle to me, and did not marvel, and did not soften, and only grew colder. Vesper had a great fondness for horses, you see. She rode beautifully. I will grant her that, as I will grant her nothing else. And she had wanted Halcyon from the moment she first laid eyes on him, the way she wanted everything at Alderhithe that was not yet hers. The way, in the end, she wanted my place at the foot of the stairs. The morning after Lord Merrick's visit, a new rule went round the household from the housekeeper's room. Her Grace, it was said, was no longer to enter the stable yard. The stallion was dangerous. It was for her own protection. I read the meaning under the words as easily as I had read the ring off my own hand. They were beginning to take from me the few things I had left, and they were doing it carefully, one at a time, the way you would strip a house you meant to leave standing but empty. What none of them knew, what my husband himself did not yet know, was that the house was never his to strip. Here is the thing they had all forgotten, in 4 years of teaching me to be small. Alderhithe was mine. Not in the way a wife's things become her husband's, which in those days was every way that the law recognized. I mean it plainly, and I mean it in full. The ground the great house stood upon, the slate quarried to roof it, the very sea wall that held the cliff garden back from the water, all of it had been bought and paid for with Carroll money. And Carroll money was mine, and my father, who had trusted no one in his life and had been proved right in every instance, had made certain of it in ink before he would let me marry a duke at all. My father was Josiah Carow, and I have heard him called many things by people who would not have been received in his parlor. A tin man, a coal and copper man, a man who smelled of the shaft. He began with nothing but a strong back and a head for figures, and he ended owning 3 mines, a shipping line out of Falmouth, and a share in the new railway that was even then being surveyed across the moor. When he died, he left it all to me, his only living child, and he left me something else besides. A warning given in the last clear week of his life, his hand cold around mine. "They'll want the money, Elowen," he said. "The old names always do, when their own runs thin, and Renmore's runs thinner than most. Whatever airs the boy puts on, let them have the wedding, but not the whip hand, never the whip hand." The dukedom of Renmore, in the year I married into it, was drowning. 3 generations of dukes who had never once soiled their hands with anything so vulgar as work had gambled and built and gambled again until the estate groaned under debts that the rents could not touch. My husband needed a fortune, the way a drowning man needs a rope, and my father's fortune was the rope, and so the great match had been made, the tin man's daughter and the heir of Renmore, old blood and new gold, and the county had laughed behind its gloves and come to the wedding anyway, for the wine was very good. But my father did not hand over the rope and step back. He was cleverer than that, and he was dying, and dying men do their clearest thinking. He engaged the finest man of law in Truro, a dry, exact person named Hollis, who feared nothing but error, and together they drew a marriage settlement so carefully wrought that I did not myself understand the whole of its teeth until much later. The debts of Renmore were paid, with my money. The estate was saved, with my money. But the settlement did not simply pour that gold into my husband's open hands. It placed the great bulk of the Carow fortune and the Alderheith lands purchased to secure it, into a trust, and it named the beneficiary of that trust as myself and my heirs, and it bound the whole with a codicil in my father's own hand that provided in language dry Hollis had made proof against any court in England that should the Duke of Renmore ever repudiate his wife, should he put her aside or hold her in open contempt, or seek to set another woman in her place, the trust would close its fist, and the Duke would find himself master of a great and beautiful house that he did not, in any particular that a bank would honor own. He had signed it? Of course he had signed it. He had been drowning, and you do not read the fine print of a rope. He had signed it 4 years ago and forgotten it, as men forget debts they do not mean to pay. And in 4 years of watching him grow careless and cruel, I had never once spoken of it, because a weapon spoken of is a weapon half spent, and my father had raised me to know the difference. So you will understand now why I did not weep in the marble hall. He thought he was casting me down. He thought Vesper on his arm and the whispered rules and the stable yard closed against me were the slow, sure work of putting a tiresome wife in her grave while she yet breathed. He did not know that with every step he took, every public slight, every witness he gathered to my humiliation, he was building, brick by careless brick, the very case my father had written into law, open contempt. Another woman in her place. He was doing it in front of the Lord Lieutenant of the county. He could not have served me better if I had asked. There was only one difficulty, and it was not a small one. The settlement, the original, the signed and sealed and witnessed thing, the single document upon which the whole of it turned, was not in my hands. Dry Hollis had died the winter before my father, and in the confusion of 2 deaths, the papers had gone where papers go, into the muniment room of the estate, into the great iron-bound chests where the Renmore stewards had kept 300 years of deeds and rolls and secrets. My own copy, the one my father had pressed on me, had been in the small writing desk in my private sitting room, and a fortnight past I had gone to that desk and found the lock forced and the drawer empty. Someone in that house had begun to understand what I held. Someone had moved first. So I smiled at the dinners where I was insulted, and I stood quiet at the foot of the stairs, and I let them think me broken, because somewhere within the walls of the house that was mine and did not know it, in a locked room I was now forbidden even to approach, lay a single sheet of paper that could unmake a duke, and I meant to have it. They did not strike at me all at once. I have come to think that was the cleverest thing about it, and the most frightening, that there was no single blow I could point to and name as cruelty, only a long, patient narrowing, like a tide coming in over flat sand, each small advance so gentle that you do not understand you are surrounded until the water's at your throat. The stable yard went first, then the morning walks. A footman was set all courtesy to accompany her grace whenever she went out of doors, for the paths are treacherous near the cliff, and the household would not forgive itself. I was not to walk alone. I was not to ride. I was watched at breakfast, watched at prayers, watched in the long afternoons that had once been my own, and every small deviation from the ordinary was gathered up and carried, I did not doubt, to the housekeeper's room. Pellow kept her accounts of me. Mrs. Pellow had come to Alderheith the year before with excellent references, and a smile that never once reached her eyes, and she had understood from her first week which way advantage lay in that house. She served Vesper as though Vesper were already the mistress of it. My own maid, a good Cornish girl named Jenna, who had been kind to me, was dismissed on a pretext, a missing brooch that was later found exactly where I had left it, though no apology followed, and a new woman was put in her place who reported my every word before the ink of it was dry. And the dinners became a theater of it. Vesper sat now at the foot of the long table, in the chair that had been mine, and directed the courses and the candles and the flow of talk, while I was set halfway down the board among the neighbors' unmarried daughters, as though I were some poor relation brought in to even the numbers. Alaric did more than permit it. He addressed his remarks past me as though my place were empty, and the guests, taking their cue from their host, learned to let their eyes slide over me, the way one slides past a stain on the wallpaper one is too well bred to mention. I ate little and said less, and counted the courses out on the fine bone china. China. My own father's works had fired, though not a soul at that table knew it, and I kept my spine straight, because a straight spine costs a woman nothing, and it was the one thing left in that house they had not yet found a way to tax. And then there was Mr. Kell. I had scarcely marked him in my early years at Alderhithe. He was the Duke's man of business, a soft, round, quiet person with damp hands and a habit of appearing in doorways without having been heard to arrive. He kept the estate's accounts and the estate's secrets, and he had grown fat, I now understood, on both. In those first weeks after Lord Merrick's visit, I began to find him always at the edge of things, in the corridor outside my sitting room, on the stair below the muniment room, murmuring with Vesper in the window embrasures, where the noise of the sea covered speech. It was Mr. Kell who let the word fall that told me the true shape of the danger. I overheard it by accident, or by the small mercy of Providence, standing unseen in the passage behind the library one gray afternoon. His voice, low and reasonable, the walking at all hours, the business with the horse, a beast that has crippled a grown man. Any physician of sense would call it a want of balance in the mind. Lord Merrick himself remarked how strangely her grace bore herself. We need only gather the observations, and in time. And Vesper's voice, cool as a coin. In time she signs nothing, and she keeps nothing, and no court in England listens to a woman whose own household swears she is not sound. I stood very still in the passage until they had gone, my back against the cold paneling, and I understood at last that this was not jealousy, and it was not even greed, or not greed alone, it was strategy. They did not merely mean to humiliate me and raise Vesper in my stead. They meant to have me declared of unsound mind, to gather up my strangenesses, the walking and the horse and the quiet, and build of them a case that would let them shut me away in some soft private house on the moor, where a difficult wife could be kept out of sight and out of law, and where a woman who could not manage her own affairs most certainly could not enforce a settlement. They had begun with the theft of my copy from the writing desk. Now I understood it was only the first move of a longer game. If they could not find and destroy the original, the great signed thing, sealed in the iron chests of the muniment room, then they would make sure that when I reached for it, no one in England would take the word of a madwoman that it meant what it said. I wrote to my father's old man of affairs in Falmouth. The letter never reached him. I learned later it had gone straight to Mr. Kell. I wrote to Hollis's successor in Truro. That letter, too, went into the fire in the housekeeper's grate. I was alone then, more truly alone than I had ever been, inside my own house, above my own fortune, watched at every hour, my every reasonable act being quietly written down as the raving of a woman losing her wits. And the muniment room, where the only proof of my whole life now lay, had a new lock upon its door. I would have you understand that I expected nothing from my husband. I had learned, over 4 years, to expect nothing. And it is a strange kind of freedom, expecting nothing. It leaves you very little that can be taken. So the thing that happened next, I did not look for, and did not want, and have never fully forgiven him for, because a clean enemy is a simple thing to fight, and Alaric, God help us both, did not stay clean. It was the horse that did it. Of course it was the horse. They could forbid me the stable yard, but they could not silence Halcyon, and on the 3rd morning of my confinement he began to scream again, the old broken screaming worse than before, because now the one thing that had quieted him was gone from his mornings. It carried up from the yard through the whole east front of the house, that terrible sound. And I sat in my confinement and pressed my hands to my ears and wept, at last, not for myself, but for the poor grieving beast who had done nothing but love a dead man too well. On the 4th morning, I could not bear it. I went down. I put the startled footman aside with a look my father might have owned, and I walked into the forbidden yard, and I went to the great black horse, and the screaming stopped the moment he saw me, and I stood with my forehead against his neck in the cold, and neither of us made a sound. And when I looked up, my husband was standing in the arch of the yard. He had come out without his coat, his dark hair was uncombed, he had the look of a man who had not slept. He was watching me, not with the careless contempt I had grown used to, not with the cruelty he wore at dinner like a good coat, but with something I had no name for, something that had gone very still behind his eyes. Halcyon's ears came back at the sight of him, and I felt the great body tense under my hand, and without thinking I laid my palm flat against the stallion's cheek and murmured, and he settled. The killing horse, calmed by a woman my husband had told a lord of the realm was not fit to stand at his side. Alaric looked at that for a long moment. Then he said quietly, in a voice I had not heard from him in years, the voice almost, of the man I had believed I was marrying. My father used to say Halcyon knew a true heart from a false one. I thought it was an old man's sentiment. I said nothing. I had learned the great power of saying nothing. He will not let Kell within 20 feet, my husband went on half to himself. He put Trevorrow in his bed for a fortnight. He would take the arm off any groom in the county. He looked at me, and there was a crease between his brows, the look of a man doing as some whose answer he does not like. But he stands under your hand like a lamb. He is not wicked, I said. It was the first I had spoken to my husband, unbidden, in longer than I could remember. He is only grieving, and no one troubled to see the difference. Something crossed his face at that, a flinch, quickly mastered. And for one moment, one single unguarded moment, I saw a doubt open in him like a crack running through ice, and behind the doubt, something that might, in another man, in another life, have grown into shame. Then Vesper's voice came from the house, light and bright, calling his name, and the ice closed over, and he turned from me without another word, and went in to her. In the days that followed I caught it again, that crack, though he labored to seal it over each time. He came to the yard in the mornings now. I do not believe he could have told you why, and he would sooner have died than confess it, and stood in the stone arch and watched me quiet the horse, saying nothing, a dark shape against the pale water. Once, passing me in the long gallery, he checked his stride, as though to speak, and thought the better of it, and went on. And once I found a book left open upon the very table where I liked to sit of an afternoon, a plain, ugly, practical volume on the working of the deep tin loads, the sort of thing no Duke of Renmore had opened in 300 years of being a duke. I knew, by the mere fact of its lying there, that someone had gone hunting through the shelves for a thing that might speak to me, and had not wished to be caught in the doing of it. These were small matters. I set them down not because they weighed anything, but because I had to labor so to make them weigh nothing at all. Each was a hand held out in the dark. And I had made myself a promise that I would not take a hand held out by the man who had stood in his own hall and let me be called unfit before a lord of the realm. I owed my father that much. I owed the girl in the sea-gray silk that much, but I had seen it, and I want to tell you that it gladdened me, that flicker in him, and it did not. It frightened me more than all his cruelty had. A cruel husband I could ruin without a backward glance. But a husband who was beginning, however faintly, to see me, to wonder what he had thrown away, to feel the first cold draft of what he had done. That was a complication my father had not written into any settlement. That was a door I could not afford to let open, in him or in myself, for I had loved him once. That was the truth I had buried deepest of all. And a woman who means to unmake a man had better be very certain she has finished loving him first. I told myself I had. I went back to my rooms and I told myself so several times. I was not, it turned out, so good a liar as I believed. Lady Morwenna sent for me on a Thursday, and did not refuse Lady Morwenna. She was near 80, the great aunt of my husband, and she had buried a husband and 2 brothers and a nephew who ought to have been Duke, and she lived in a set of warm, cluttered rooms in the West Tower, with a fire kept high summer and winter, and a grey parrot that swore in Cornish. She had opposed my marriage, I knew, though not for the reasons the rest of them had. She had told Alaric to his face that he was marrying a fortune, and would deserve the wife who came attached to it. She frightened everyone in Alderhithe, including, I think, Vesper, who could not charm her, and had given up trying. She was sitting very upright by her fire when I came in, a shawl of old lace about her shoulders, and she looked at me with eyes as black and bright as a jackdaw's, and she said without any greeting at all, "Sit down, child, and stop pretending to be simple. It does not suit you, and it never did." I sat. "They tell me you're losing your wits," she said. "Kell has been up here twice, oozing, hoping I will lend my name to it, the family's aged conscience. Do you see? To swear the young Duchess raves," she snorted. I told him I have watched this family produce fools and drunkards and gamblers for 60 years, and that you are the first person to enter it in a generation who is plainly, tiresomely, entirely sane. He did not care for that. I did not trust myself to speak. "I knew your father," she went on, "and that did make me start. Josiah Carow, oh, do not look so. I never met the man in my life. Your kind and mine did not dine together. But I knew of him, and I know his work when I see it." Her sharp eyes went, deliberately, to my bare left hand, where the ring no longer was, and then back up to my face. A man does not build 3 mines in a shipping line by being a fool with a contract. He would not have handed a fortune to a duke without a chain on it. What is the chain, Aloan? The sound of my own name, my true name, spoken kindly in that house, undid something in me that 4 years of cruelty had not touched. I had not known how starved I was for one voice that did not want a thing from me. "I cannot say," I whispered. "Cannot, or will not." "Will not," I admitted. "Not yet. To speak of it is to spend it." For the first time the old woman smiled, a slow, fierce, entirely delighted smile that took 20 years off her face. "Good girl," she said softly. "Oh, good girl, your father raised you well." She leaned forward, and the firelight caught her rings. "Then let me tell you what an old woman sees, and you may do with it as you please. I see a man who has grown careless, and a jade who has grown bold, and I see them building a scaffold in broad daylight and never once looking up to see who they have set to stand upon it. They think you broken. They are witnessing your patience and calling it defeat." She tapped the arm of her chair. "But patience in a Carow is not the same thing as surrender, is it?" It was not a question, so I did not answer it. "They mean to move the old papers," she said then, and her voice dropped and my heart went still. I heard Kell say it to Pello on the stair. "What? The chests in the muniment room are to go to the Duke's man in London for safekeeping at the month's end. Whatever it is you are waiting for, child, whatever your father chained to this house, if it is behind that door you have, until the month's end, to have it. After that it goes to London, into the keeping of men who are paid to lose things. The month's end. 11 days. You are watched every hour," Morwenna said, sitting back. "You cannot walk to the yard without a footman at your heel. How you will get into a locked room in a watched house in 11 days, I am sure I do not know." The black eyes glinted. "But I am an old woman, and old women are invisible, and I have lived in this tower for 40 years, and there is very little about the bones of this house that I do not know." She reached into the work-basket beside her chair and drew out something small and held it in her closed hand. "Including where the 9th Duke's grandfather hid a second way into every important room in it, in case the mob ever came for us. It never did. The knowledge went out of the family with him. Nearly." She opened her hand. On her palm lay an old iron key, dark with age. It was longer than a door key. Its bow worked into the shape of a small bird, a wren, she told me, the ninth Duke's grandfather's private conceit, a little joke struck in iron, for the wren is the smallest bird in the hedge and slips through where the hawk cannot follow. I looked at it lying in that ancient ringed palm, and I felt the whole locked weight of the great house shift very slightly upon its foundations. 11 days, and a wren's key, and an old woman who had decided, for reasons that were entirely and gloriously her own, to stand on my side of it. "Sit with me a while," she said, "and drink your tea, and let them think an old woman is boring you with the past. And before you go, I will tell you about the passage behind the muniment room." Morwenna had given me the way twice over, in the warm clutter of her tower, her old finger drawing the route along the arm of her chair, as though it were a map only she could read up the disused chapel stair. Behind the third panel from the little painted door, where the wainscot sounded hollow if you knocked it low. Then down in the dark, along a passage the width of a coffin, that ran inside the very thickness of the walls the ninth Duke's grandfather had built against a mob that never came, and out, if the wren's key turned, into the muniment room itself, behind the great tapestry that hung along its eastern wall. "Wait for a night with no moon," she had said, "and where no light you cannot hide in a heartbeat." I waited 2 nights. The second was moonless and thick with sea fog, the kind that swallows sound, and I judged it as good as I would get before the month turned. I lay in my clothes until the house had been still an hour, and then I rose, and I did not light a candle, and I went barefoot with my slippers in my hand past the door of the maid they had set to watch me, who slept, thank God, like the dead. The chapel stair was cold as a well. I found the third panel by feel and knocked it low and heard the hollow answer, and pressed until it gave with a small dry sigh of old wood. The passage breathed out at me. 300 years of dust and stone and the faint salt damp that lives in the bones of every house on that coast. I stepped in. I drew the panel to behind me. And then there was no light at all, none, a darkness so complete it had weight, and I stood in it, with my heart going like a hammer, and made myself breathe slow. I went by touch, one hand on each wall, the stones sweating cold under my fingers, my bare feet finding each step down before I trusted my way to it. Somewhere water was dripping, patient and unhurried, the way water has all the time in the world. Once something ran across my foot, small and quick, and I bit down on the cry before it could leave me. I thought of my father. Not the whip hand, never the whip hand. I thought of the ring warm in my closed palm in the marble hall. I went on. The passage ended in a stone so flat and blank I nearly missed the keyhole, a black slot no wider than a coin, set at the height of my hip. My hands were shaking so that I dropped the wren's key once and had to go down on my knees in that lightless coffin of a space and sweep the floor with my fingers until I found it again. Then I fitted it and turned it, and for one endless moment it would not move, and then it gave, all at once, with a groan of iron that seemed to me loud enough to wake the county. I froze. I counted my own heartbeats, 10 of them, 20. No footstep, no voice, only the drip of the water and the great blind dark. I pushed, and the wall swung, and the heavy fall of the tapestry brushed my face like a hand, and I came out into the muniment room of Alderhithe. Here I dared a light, the smallest stub of candle, cupped close, its flame barely a bead. The room leapt up around me in shutters of gold, the iron-bound chests ranged along the walls, 3 centuries of them, each one lettered and dated in the crabbed hands of dead stewards, the racked deeds, the great ledgers on their shelf. My whole life was in this room, sealed in one of these black boxes, and I had perhaps an hour to find which. I began with the newest, the chests of the last 5 years, for the settlement was but 4 years old, and I prayed that whoever had swept up the papers, after 2 deaths, had at least kept them in their season. My fingers flew over the lettering. I lifted lids that shrieked on their hinges and made me stop, every time, and listen, and hear nothing, and go on. Deeds of tenancy, mine leases, my own father's leases, in among them, and I could have wept to see his hand, accounts correspondence. And then, in the fourth chest wrapped in oiled linen and tied with faded tape, a packet with my father's seal upon it, unbroken. I knew it before I opened it. I knew the weight of it in my 2 hands. I cut the tape with my teeth and unfolded the linen, and there it was. The marriage settlement of Aloan Caro and the heir of Renmore. Every clause in dry Hollis's exact copperplate, every signature beneath, my father's and the old duke's and Alaric's own bold, careless scrawl, and the codicil in my father's dying hand, witnessed and sealed. Should the Duke of Renmore ever repudiate his wife, or hold her in open contempt, or seek to set another woman in her place, the trust closes its fist. The house is not his. I pressed it against me. 4 years I had waited for the feel of that paper, and it was nothing, it was only paper, and it was everything. But it was not all that chest held. Beneath the settlement lay a second bundle, and this one bore no seal of mine. These were letters and account sheets, and they were in a hand I had learned to dread. Kell's soft, round, careful hand, and they were not meant for any eye but his. I should have taken them and gone. There was no time to read. But I turned the candle to them, and my eye caught a figure, and then a name, and then I could not look away. He had been robbing the estate for years. Not in the small way of a dishonest servant skimming the household coin, in the great way, the patient way, whole rents diverted, a mine share sold and the sale never entered, sums moved to accounts in Bristol under names that were not his. And threaded all through it, in letters signed with a single initial that was not the Duke's, was another partner in the theft, a confederate. Someone inside the house who had access to the Duke's ear and the Duke's confidence, who had helped Kell steer the whole slow plunder, and who was to have half. I sat back on my heels in the dark. Vesper. Not a mistress at all, or not only. A thief's partner, planted at my husband's side, and my husband too vain, and too grieved and too eager to be flattered to see that the woman he had raised above his own wife was picking the estate to the bone with the very man who kept its books. They had not merely wanted me gone. They had wanted me gone because a duchess who read Latin and understood a ledger was the one person in that house who might in time have looked too closely. I was not a rival to be humbled. I was a witness to be silenced. I gathered it all. Settlement, codicil, Kell's letters, the account sheets, and I bound them against my body beneath my shawl, flat and close. And I pinched out the candle and turned for the tapestry, and the passage, and the safe blind dark. And under the door, from the stair beyond, came the swing and slide of lantern light. There was no time. I heard the key in the muniment lock, the true door, the iron one, and voices low on the other side of it, and I lunged for the tapestry, for the seam of it, for the passage that meant escape. My hand was on the cold edge of the swinging stone. One breath more, and I would have been inside it, and gone. The door opened behind me. The lantern flooded the room with a hard yellow light, and threw my shadow up the wall enormous, and a voice I knew better than my own heartbeat spoke into the sudden brightness, cool and unhurried, and threaded through with a pleasure so complete it was almost tender. "Well," said Vesper, "the mad Duchess, out of her bed, in the dead of night, with the family paper stuffed down her gown. I heard her turn to the man beside her, heard the smile in it. And thieving, too, Mr. Kell. How very, very convenient. We'll pause here a moment. If this story has its hooks in you, if you want to see what the Quiet Duchess does next, take a second now and subscribe, so the tale finds its way back to you. Then stay with me. The night is far from over. There is a particular silence that falls when 3 people who mean you harm are deciding, in front of you, exactly how much harm will serve them best. I stood in it. I did not run, because there was nowhere to run that would not prove their case for them. And I did not weep, because I had spent those tears years ago in rooms with the doors shut. I stood with my back to the tapestry and the papers flat against my heart, and I let them look at me. And I thought, whatever else, they do not know what I am holding. They think it is theft. They do not know it is the knife. She has been at the chests, said Kell, and his soft voice was not quite steady, for he above all men had reason to fear what a hand in those chests might find. You see how it is, Miss Vesper, exactly as we feared. The poor lady's wits, Vesper agreed, have led her to break a lock and rifle 300 years of a family's private history in her nightgown. Dr. Pengelly will want to hear it from her own household, I should think, and here she came a step closer, and a lantern lit her lovely pitiless face from below, that with such a tale, and such a witness as Mr. Simbolt, Kell, and my own poor account of the strain she has been under, I should think we need trouble the Duke with very little of it, and the county with none at all. She can be gone to the doctor's house on the moor before the week is out, quietly. For her own protection. The same soft words they had used to close the stable yard. I understood then that they meant to have me out of Alderhithe within days, not set aside, not shamed, but removed, shut behind a door on the moor, where no court would ever hear the word of a woman her own household had sworn was raving. And once I was gone, the chests would go to London, and Kell's letters would go into some Bristol fire, and there would be no witness left in all the world. Send for the Duke, I said. It was the last thing they expected, and I saw it land. Vesper's smile faltered, just at the edge. His Grace is not to be disturbed, said Kell. Send for the Duke, I said again, quite calm, or I will make noise enough in this house to bring him and every servant in it, and you may explain to him, Mr. Poor, Kell, why you were in the muniment room at midnight and what you feared I would find there. I let that sit. Shall I raise my voice, or will you send the boy? For the first time, Kell's damp face went the color of tallow. He glanced at Vesper, and in that glance, that small, frightened, calculating glance between them, I read the whole of their partnership plain as print, and knew for certain what the letters had told me. They sent the boy. Alaric came in his shirt, a candle in his hand, his dark hair wild from the pillow, and he stopped in the doorway and looked at the four of us, his man of business, his mistress, his wife, with her back to the tapestry. All of us lit up like a scene in a theater, and I watched him try to make sense of it and fail. She broke into the muniment room, Vesper said swiftly, before I could speak, and her voice had changed entirely now, gone soft and grieved and womanly. Alaric, I am so sorry. We had hoped to spare you this. She is not well. She has not been well. For months, and now she has taken to breaking locks in the night. Dr. Pengelly must be sent for. It is past what any of us can manage with kindness alone. He looked at her. He looked at me. And I said nothing. I had learned the great power of saying nothing, and I used it now as I had never used it before, for I had a choice in that moment, and I made it deliberately. I could have flung the papers down and cried the truth and watched it turn to chaos, his word against theirs, the mad wife's ravings against the loyal servant and the gentle mistress. Or I could hold my peace and hold my proof, and let my husband show me, in front of witnesses who would matter later, exactly what manner of man his months of cruelty had left him. So I said nothing, and I let the silence do its work, and I watched him choose. He crossed the room. Not to Vesper, to me. He stood before me, and he looked down into my face for a long moment, and something moved behind his eyes that I had not seen since the stable yard, the crack. Run all the way through. Now go to your rooms, he said to me very low. And then, to the others, without turning, no one is sent for. No doctor, no one leaves this house, and no one enters it until I have understood what has happened here. Kell, you will give me the keys to every chest in this room tonight, and you will not touch them again. His voice did not rise. It did not need to. Vesper, go to bed. It was not rescue. I want that understood. He did not know what I held, and he did not take my part against them out of any faith in me. He took it because a doubt he had been strangling for weeks had finally slipped its hands. and he could not, standing there, quite bring himself to sign his wife away on the word of a man whose keys he had just for the first time in years thought to question. But it bought me 3 days, and it did something worse to Vesper and Kell than any accusation could have. It frightened them. I went to my rooms. I hid the papers where no searching hand would think to look, sewn flat inside the ticking of Morwenna's old work-basket, carried up to her tower the next morning under a heap of mending. And I waited, and I watched, and within a day I saw what fear had done. The packing of the chests, which was to have waited for the month's end, began the very next morning, and a letter went out by the fast post, in Kell's hand, and I did not need to read it to know its direction. They had sent for Dr. Pengelly after all. The Duke had forbidden it. They had done it anyway. Which told me the last thing I needed to know, that Vesper and Kell no longer believed my husband would do as he was told. They had stopped serving him. They were racing him now, racing to have me certified and gone before Alaric's waking conscience could cost them everything. The doctor would come in 3 days. I had 3 days to spring a trap of my own. You cannot fight men like Kell in the dark and in secret, for the dark and the secret are where they live and thrive. I had learned that across 4 bitter years of marriage, that a woman's word, spoken behind a closed door, weighs nothing against a man's, and that the only testimony the world cannot wave aside is the kind given in the open, before people it dares not call liars. I would not make the error of fighting them quietly. If I was to win, I would win in the light, in the open, before people whose word the world could not wave away, and I had 3 days to gather them. I could send no letter myself. Every line I wrote went into Kell's hands or the housekeeper's fire, so I did not write as myself. Morwenna wrote, an old woman's rambling note, all weather and rheumatism and the tedium of the country, of a kind no one would trouble to intercept, and folded inside it, in my hand, went 2 others. One was to my father's oldest friend and man of affairs in Falmouth, Mr. Praed, who had known me since I was a child in my father's counting-house, and whom my marriage and my husband's long coldness had let slip out of my life. The other was to Lord Merrick. Trevorrow carried them out. I had gone to him at first light in the stable yard, for I walked there openly now, my husband's silence having become a kind of permission, and I had stood at Halcyon's shoulder with my hand in his mane, and I had told the old groom a little of the truth, not all, enough. That the Duchess, who had given him back his horse, and his heart was in danger of being called mad and shut away, and that a letter carried quietly to Falmouth might prevent it. He heard me out, his weathered face working, and then he spat into the straw and said he had ridden for the old Duke through worse weather than any conscience Kell ever had, and that his sister's boy kept the livery stable at the Falmouth road, and that the letters would be in Mr. Praed's hands by the following night, or he was not a Cornishman. They were. Mr. Praed did not merely write back. He came, quietly, by the coast road, and put up at the inn in the village under another name. And with him he brought 2 things I could not have got for myself. A copy, drawn from my father's own papers that he had kept all these years, of the deed of trust that stood behind the settlement, so that even had the original in the chests been burned, the thing itself could be proved, and a letter, in his own respected hand, laying the whole matter before Lord Merrick as the Lord Lieutenant and Chief Magistrate of the county, and begging his lordship to be present at Alderhithe on a day I named, the very day the doctor was to come, upon a matter touching the honor of a great family, an Englishwoman. Lord Merrick, who had bowed over Vesper's hand in that marble hall, and gone away troubled, and who was, whatever his faults, a man of the old sort who did not like what he had seen, Lord Merrick sent back a single line, "I will come." And while I built my trap, my husband, unknowing, walked into the truth by another road. I did not learn all of it until later, but I will set it here so you understand. Alaric had taken Kell's keys that night, and being at last a man with a doubt and a set of keys and a long sleepless conscience, He had done what he had not done in the 3 years since his father died. He had opened his own account books and read them, as a man reads who suspects he has been played for a fool. It did not take him long. A duke who has never troubled to look may be robbed for years. A duke who finally looks, and who is not, whatever else he is, a stupid man, sees the shape of it in an evening. The diverted rents, the vanished mine share, the Bristol names, and the single initial, threaded all through it, that was not his own. He said nothing. That I will grant him. He had learned, perhaps from watching me, the power of saying nothing. He let Kell go on packing the chests and Vesper go on smiling, and he waited, as I waited, for the day the doctor came. Though neither of us yet knew we were laying the same table. On the last night before it, I could not sleep. I went up, past the sleeping watchmate, to Morwenna's tower, and the old woman was awake by her fire as though she had known I would come. The gray parrot hunched and muttering on its perch. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," I said. She looked at me a long time. "You could run, child. Praed would take you tonight. You have the trust, you have the proof. You could be in Falmouth by morning, and free of the whole rotten house of them. And leave them the house," I said. "And leave them free to do it, to the next fool with a fortune." No. I looked into her fire. My father did not chain this house to me so that I could run from it. He chained it so that I could take it. Tomorrow I take it. Morwenna smiled, her slow, fierce smile, and reached over and pressed the wren's key back into my hand, folding my fingers shut over it. "Then, wear this," she said, "where the ring used to be, and let them see it." They gathered in the library because Vesper had chosen the library. She had grown fond these last weeks of arranging her scenes in the finest rooms, and she did not yet understand that she was arranging the last of them. It was a gray morning with the sea loud beyond the cliffs. A fire had been lit, and into that long, book-lined room they came, one by one, each believing they knew what the day would hold. Dr. Pengelly came first, a dry, careful man with a black bag and a manner of professional sorrow, who had been told he was to examine a lady in a delicate collapse of the reason, and who had been paid, I do not doubt, enough to find precisely what he had been engaged to find. Kell came soft and damp and watchful. Vesper came in dove gray, the very picture of a household's patient grief, and took, without being asked, the chair beside the Duke's. Mrs. T. Pello stood by the door with her hands folded, ready to swear to whatever was wanted. And then, to the surprise of all of them but me, the door opened again, and the footman announced the Lord Lieutenant of the county, and Lord Merrick came in, grave and broad and unhurried, with Mr. Say braided his shoulder, and behind them, small and upright and blazing with a private joy, Lady Morwenna on her stick. I saw Vesper's composure slip for the first time. "Your lordship," she said, rising, "we had not. This is a private family matter, a question of health." "So I am given to understand," said Lord Merrick, and sat down, and folded his hands, and looked at her with the flat courtesy of a man who has already decided he does not like you. "Pray continue. I am here at the invitation of Mr. Praed, on behalf of the Duchess of Renmore. Do go on." They did not know how to go on. The scene they had built required a mad, friendless woman and a room full of their own creatures. It did not know what to do with the magistrate. Dr. Pengelly looked at Kell. Kell looked at Vesper. And Alaric at the head of the room looked at me, and I saw him understand, all at once, that I had brought Lord Merrick here, that the wife he had thought broken had summoned the chief magistrate of the county to his library, and something crossed his face that was not anger at all. Why, it was something perilously close to awe. I stood. I had dressed with great care that morning, as I had dressed for the reception that began all this, gray silk the color of the sea, my mother's pearls, but my left hand was not bare now. On the third finger, where a plain band of Cornish gold had turned loose for 4 years, I wore an old iron key worked in the shape of a wren, threaded on a ribbon and wound close. and I saw more than one eye go to it and fail to understand it. That was, well, they would understand it soon. Since we are speaking of my health, I said, let us speak plainly. I am not mad. I never have been. I am, however, a great deal richer than anyone in this room. But myself has understood, and I think the time has come to explain why, and I told them. I told them of my father, Josiah Carow, who smelled of the shaft and built 3 mines and would not hand a fortune to a dukedom without a chain upon it. I told them of the settlement, and the trust and the codicil in a dying man's hand. I laid the original upon the table, before Lord Merrick, the true one, sealed and witnessed that I had taken from the chest, and beside it Mr. Briss. Braid laid his father's copy of the deed of trust, so that the two lay together and could not be waved away. The estate of Renmore was bankrupt when I married into it, I said. It was my father's money that paid its debts and bought back its mortgaged land, and my father's money that stands to this day behind every acre and every stone of Alderhithe. He did not give it. He lent it into a trust of which I am the sole beneficiary, and he wrote one condition into that trust. I turned to Lord Merrick. That should the Duke of Renmore ever repudiate his wife, should he put her aside, or hold her in open contempt, or set another woman publicly in her place, the trust would close, and the whole of it, house and land and all, would fall to me alone. The room had gone very still. My lord, I said, some weeks ago, in the great hall of this house before your own eyes, my husband took another woman by the hand and told you she would stand beside him in my place. You saw it. You bowed over her hand. I let it land. By the terms my father wrote and my husband signed, Alderhithe passed to me in that hour. It has been mine since the morning you came to call. Everyone in this room save myself has spent these weeks conspiring to shut away, as a madwoman, the woman who owns the roof above their heads. Vesper was on her feet. This is precisely the sort of grand delusion, Doctor. You see how— Sit down, said Lord Merrick without heat, and she sat, because there are voices one obeys, and she had never learned to counterfeit that one. There is more, I said, and this part is not mine to keep. I laid the second bundle on the table. Kell's letters, the account sheets, the Bristol names. Mr. Kell has been robbing this estate for years. Diverted rents. A mine share sold and never entered. Monies moved under false names. And he has not done it alone. I did not look at Vesper. I did not have to. Every eye in the room did it for me. His partner in the theft, promised half, is the same woman my husband set above me. She did not come to Alderhithe for love, my lord. She came for the account books. I was never her rival. I was the only person in this house who might one day read a ledger and understand it, and so I had to be made mad and got rid of before I did. And then the thing happened that I had not dared to plan for. Alaric rose. I had built my trap to spring with or without him. I had told myself I expected nothing, and I had meant it. But he rose and he walked to the table, and he looked down at Kell's letters, at the initial threaded, all through them, that was not his own. And he did not look surprised, because he had already found it himself in the long sleepless nights with the account books. He looked instead unspeakably tired. I have seen these figures, he said quietly to Lord Merrick. I found them myself 3 nights ago in my own books, and I have spent every hour since trying to persuade myself I was mistaken. He straightened. I was not mistaken. Every word my wife has spoken is true. The theft is true. The settlement is true. He turned at last to Vesper, and his voice did not rise, and it was the more terrible for that. And you are true, madam, in the only sense that word will ever again apply to you. Get out of my house. Your house? I said. It was not cruelty. It was only the fact of it. Alaric, it is not your house. He looked at me. And then, a Duke of Renmore, before the Lord Lieutenant of the county, in the library that had been his sanctuary and his father's before him. He inclined his head to me, slowly, the way a man bows to a truth he can no longer outrun. "No," he said, "it is not. It is yours. It always was." And I was too proud and too blind and too grieved to see the woman I had been given until I had thrown her away in front of a lord of the realm. A muscle moved in his jaw. "You need not tell me what I have lost, Aloan. I've been counting it for 3 nights, and I will be counting it, I think, for the rest of my life." Lord Merrick rose then, and it was over very quickly. The way such things are once the standing has shifted. Kell was taken in charge that same afternoon. Fraud. On such a scale being a matter for the assizes, and Lord Merrick being exactly the man to see it there. Vesper was gone from Alderhithe within the hour, in a hired chaise, with what she could carry and nothing that was not her own, which was little, and whatever became of her afterward I never troubled to learn. For a woman who has weighed your liberty against her purse and chosen the purse is not a woman whose later fortunes need concern you. Dr. Pengelly folded his black bag and left without a word, having wisely discovered that he had no patient here after all. And I stood in the library that was mine, with the sea loud beyond the cliffs, and the wren's key on my finger where the ring had been, and I found that I was not weeping, and was not triumphant, and was only at long last, and after a very long time, free. I did not put the ring back on. He did not ask me to. That more than anything, he said in the library, was the first thing that made me look at my husband and wonder whether the crack that had run through him might, in time, let something new grow in the broken place. A lesser man! The man he had been a season before would have come to me the next morning full of soft words, trying to mend with charm what he had broken with cruelty, hurrying to put the ring back on my hand before the ink of the scandal was dry, because a wife restored is tidier than a wife who owns your house. He did not. Instead, he came to me the day after Kell was taken, and stood in the doorway of the room that had been the old Duke's study, and was now by every law that a bank would honor, mine. And he said, "I have written to my mother's people in the north. There is a house there, small, that comes to me through her and not through Renmore. The one thing in the world that is still honestly my own. I mean to go there. You will not want me under this roof, and you would be right not to." He paused. "I will sign whatever your Mr. Praed puts before me. I will make no claim and no trouble. You have had trouble enough from this family to last 3 lifetimes. I had prepared myself for pleading, and had my armor on against it. I had no armor ready for this. Why, I said, did you not put another woman in your place then and keep the house? You had only to be patient. You had only to wait and manage me as Kell managed you. Why give it up so easily now, when you might fight?" He was quiet a moment. Beyond the window, in the yard, I could hear Halcyon, not screaming now, but calling, the deep, glad sound he made when he heard my step, though it was not yet my step he heard. "'Cause I have spent 3 years, he said, being a duke who did not look at his books, at his people, at his wife. And I find I would rather be a poor man who looks than go on being that." He almost smiled. The old severe, not quite smile, but with something new behind it. "Halcyon knew you the first morning. My father would have known you. I am the last fool in this house to understand what it had, and I would be a worse one to pretend I deserve to keep it. Goodbye, Aloan. The house suits you. It never suited me." And he went. I let him go. I want that understood too. I did not stop him, and I did not weep, and I did not, that day, feel anything so simple as sorrow or so clean as triumph. I felt the way a field feels, I think, when a long, hard frost finally lifts. Not warm yet, not green yet, but no longer locked. Able, for the first time in years, to imagine a spring. There was a great deal to do. A robbed estate does not mend itself. A household schooled in cruelty does not turn kind in a day. Mrs. Pellow followed Vesper down the drive before I could even dismiss her, which spared us both the conversation. I sent for the good Cornish girl, Jenna, who had been turned off over a brooch that was never lost, and gave her back her place and doubled her wage for the insult. I sat with Mr. Tincher. prayed over the account books my husband had finally learned to read, and we began, the two of us, the long, patient work of setting Renmore back upon its feet. Not with the gambling and the grandeur of the old dukes, but the way my father would have done it, with sums that balanced and rents that were fair, and a mine that paid its men before it paid its owner. And every morning, no matter the weather, I walked down to the stable yard in the gray light before the house was properly awake, and the great black horse came to his door and put his soft muzzle against my folded hands and breathed, and stood there quiet. In the season of calm his name had always promised. We had both been left behind by grief, he and I. We had both been called dangerous by people who never troubled to see the difference between a wound and a wickedness, and we had both, in the end, come home. The summer that came to Alderhigh that year was the finest anyone in the village could remember, though I have noticed that people always say so of the summer after a hard thing has ended, and perhaps it is only that we had at last the eyes to see it. The sea below the cliffs turned a blue I had not known it owned. The cliff garden, which no one had tended in the grieving years, came back in a riot of thrift and sea pink and tall foxgloves, and I learned the names of them from an old book of my father's, and got the soil of my own land under my nails doing it. The mines paid. The tenants, who had been squeezed for years to feed the estate's debts and Kell's Bristol accounts, found their rents made fair and their leases made honest, and one old man wept at my door, which I did not want, and thanked me, which I wanted even less, for I had done nothing but decline to rob him. And a world in which that earns an old man's tears is a world with a great deal still wanting in it. Lady Morwenna moved down from her cold tower into the warm south rooms at my asking, and ran the household with a tongue like a whip and a heart like a hearth, and the gray parrot learned 3 new oaths and taught them to the kitchen boy. Mr. Praed took a set of rooms in the east wing in the title of steward, and between the two of them and myself, Alderhithe became that summer a thing it had not been in living memory, a house that was not afraid of itself. I heard from my husband twice. The first was a letter in the autumn from the small northern house, a plain account, without a single soft word in it, of how he did and what he was learning about a kind of life he had never lived, and, at the end, a single line, "The horse is happy. I am glad of it. He was always the best of us." I did not answer it. I was not ready. But I did not burn it, either, and I have come to think there is a great deal of a person's true history written in the letters they neither answer nor burn. The second time, he came himself. It was the following spring, more than a year after the day in the library, and he did not ride up the drive as a duke. He came on the carrier's cart like any man, and sent up his name, and waited at the door of a house he no longer owned to be told whether he might come in. I went down myself. He was thinner and browner, and his hands, when I saw them, were not a gentleman's hands any more. They were the hands of a man who had spent a year learning to work. We walked, because I did not yet know what to say to him under a roof. And out of doors there is always the sea to look at when the words run short. We went down through the parkland toward the water, and Halcyon came with us, glossy and glad, no longer a ghost and no longer a terror, only a great gentle animal walking between 2 people in the sun. "I did not come to ask for anything," he said at last. "I want that understood. I have no right to the house, and I know it, and I have less right to you. I came only because a year of honest poverty has taught me one thing I never learned in 30 years of being given everything and earning none of it, which is that it is worth walking a very long way on a carrier's cart, simply to tell the truth to someone's face." He stopped and looked out at the water. "I loved you too late and too badly, and I threw you to the wolves to keep from admitting it. That is the whole of it. I do not expect it to mend anything. I only wanted you to have it from me in the open, where I once did you the other thing." I looked at him a long time. I did not put the ring back on. "I want that understood. Above all the rest of it, there was no ring that day, or any day after, and there was no vow renewed. And I did not fall into his arms as though a year of freedom had been a thing I was only enduring until a man came to end it. I had learned my own worth in the hardest school there is, and I did not mean to hand it back for a handsome apology, however true. But I did not send him away. I told him he might take a room in the village if he liked, and earn his bread honestly, as he seemed to have learned to do, and that if he did so, and if a year hence he still wished to walk down to the sea with me of a morning, then we might see, slowly, and on my terms. And with the whole shameful history of it laid open between us, and never once pretended away, whether two people who had begun so badly might make, out of the wreck of it, some plainer and more honest thing. It was not a promise. It was smaller than a promise, and I have come to believe it was worth more. A promise is a thing you make in an hour, in a marble hall, and can break in another. What I offered him was a door left on the latch, and the long, slow work of proving oneself worthy to knock at it, which is, I have found, the only kind of love that lasts, being the only kind that is earned every single day, rather than sworn once and then forgotten. He took the room in the village. He is there still, as I write this. Some mornings, he walks down to the sea, and some mornings, I walk out to find him already there, and the horse goes between us, and we do not say very much, and the not saying is a comfortable thing now, and not a wound. I do not know how it will end. That is the truth, and I have promised you only the truth. Perhaps in time there will be a new ring, of my choosing and my gold, given freely by a woman who owns the ground she stands on. Perhaps there will only ever be the two of us, and the horse and the sea and the long, companionable quiet. I find to my own surprise that I am content either way, for I am no longer a woman waiting to be chosen. I am the one who does the choosing now in my own house, with my own name, on my own land, and that it turns out was all I ever truly wanted. On the gray morning I quietly took the ring from my finger and let them believe they had won. They had not won. They never once understood what they had set loose.